Let's start in time. Good afternoon. I'm Vasan Srinivasan. I'm the chair of Mental Health Foundation Australia at this time. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Mental Health Foundation Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to the elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here with us this afternoon, my apologies. On behalf of the Mental Health Foundation Australia, I would like to welcome and thank each and every one of you for attending our Seniors Mental Health Forum on the 30th day of our National Mental Health Month Awareness Campaign 2021. National Mental Health Month Awareness Campaign is an initiative of Mental Health Foundation Australia to advocate for and raise awareness of Australian mental health as a community. The Mental Health Foundation Australia's National Mental Health Awareness Campaign in October is unlike many other mental health awareness campaigns. It aims to bring all Australians together in a nationwide conversation about the mental health, and we aim to maintain this conversation for an entire month and beyond through a series of various mental health related events. National Mental Health Month is a program that the MHFA is extremely proud of, and we intend to reach out and educate as many Australians as possible to help and reduce stigma and facilitate positive and non-judgmental discussion surrounding the important topic of mental health in Australia. With 1 in 5 Australians experiencing a mental health illness, it is time we give our mental health its due attention. And that is exactly what the Mental Health Foundation Australia is wanting to achieve. Throughout this month, many events have been organized in each state and territory of Australia, aiming to attract and unite Australians of all ages and backgrounds to raise awareness of the need for better mental health for Australians. This year, the theme of National Mental Health Month is Post-Pandemic Recovery Challenges and Resilience. This year's theme will focus on raising awareness about mental health in various industries and communities. Every individual has faced, and many are still facing, unprecedented challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic. With this theme in mind, we aim to extend our campaign even wider than previous years, with events planned to embrace many different community groups and people of all ages, making on the road to recovery and fostering resilience. Please join us in celebrating the Mental Health Foundation Australia's National Mental Health Awareness Campaign over the years by viewing a short video. Thank you, Nitya. And Akshay.
Hi everyone, I'm Vasan Srinivasan, Chairperson of the Mental Health Foundation Australia. It's a privilege to lead this wonderful community-based mental health organisation in its 91st year of establishment. The MHFA has grown strength to strength over the past few years. With Victorian Mental Health Month in 2018, the National Mental Health Month occurring in 2019, 2020 and this year in 2021. Last year, COVID-19 did not stop us from achieving our National Mental Health Month campaign. I'm proud to say we successfully shifted many events to a virtual platform, very much being able to pursue our objectives of raising awareness and advocating for better Australian mental health. Our primary aim is to reach out to and educate as many Australians as possible to help reduce stigma and to encourage constructive and non-judgmental dialogue on Australia's critical mental health issue. A highlight of last year's campaign was reaching out to 100,000 Australians all across the country for our National Walks for Mental Health, both virtually through our MHFA app and physically in some states. What a grand success that was. In 2021, with pandemic still affecting many of us, we decided not to give up once again, curating a carefully chosen blend of virtual and physical events for Australians to participate in. This year, we have a new and improved MHFA app giving people the opportunity to participate in National Mental Health Month from the palms of their hands. This year, theme is mental health and post-pandemic recovery challenges and resilience. Mental Health Foundation Australia is proud to partner with Australian technology business DB Results and take up the wellbeing app Am I OK? To support our members, enabling individuals to regularly check in on a private and secure platform and ask the question, Am I OK? Am I OK also alerts the user when it's time to seek outside help. We thank DB Results for this opportunity to promote well-being and early intervention. This year, we have launched a special initiative, the Mental Health Appeal on the 10th of October, our World Mental Health Day. Through this, we aim to raise funds for the development of a course promoting life and safety in young people. At the MHFA, we pride ourselves in making sure all our programs are for the community and powered by the community. We have a vast growing network of multicultural ambassadors, youth ambassadors, and future leaders who further the community voice in promoting mental health and well-being. Our multicultural network has inspired our educational and multicultural webinars as an initiative to assist individuals cope with success during the pandemic. I would like to take this moment to thank our board directors and patrons, scientific advisory committee members, our wonderful staff, multicultural and youth ambassadors, future leaders, MHFA members and major sponsors for their continuous support to our organization as we continue to work to deepen understanding of the importance of mental well-being and educating the community. Let's work in solidarity for the benefit of our mental health. Thank you, Australia.
Thank you, Akshay and Nitya. Now, I would like to invite our senior board member, Mr. Jim Gooden, Vice Chairperson of Mental Health Foundation Australia, to welcome you all. Jim Gooden is a former Vice Principal with 30 years of experience in regular secondary and special needs schools. Currently the Vice Chairperson of Mental Health Foundation of Australia and co-chair of Victorian Mental Health Month Advisory Committee. Jim is also a committee member of many other boards and committees, including the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists, Chisholm Institute of Course Advisory Committee, and the Melbourne Bipolar Network. Jim's knowledge of mental illness comes from professional, voluntary, and family experience. I had experience working with Jim side by side over the last 28 years with Mental Health Foundation of Australia. Please join me to welcome our Vice Chair, Mr. Jim Gooden.
Thank you, Vasan. A very, very kind introduction on your behalf. I'd like to begin, obviously, by welcoming all of you and particularly paying my respects to the original custodians of the land from which I speak, the Wurundjeri people. I also pay my respects to all the original inhabitants, past, present, and their generations emerging. Also, my respect and gratitude to our wonderful guest speakers. We have a tremendous lineup today. Gerard Mansour, Commissioner for Senior Victorians, Dr. Judy Tang, Clinical Neuropsychologist and Commissioner at the Victorian Multicultural Commission, Beverly Smith, Executive General Manager, Residential Communities, Australian Unity, a steadfast supporter Australian Unity is of the Mental Health Foundation. We thank them for their support and their presence always. Professor Sunil Bar, Director of the Wellbeing Clinic for Older Adults at Swinburne University, and Chris Reedy, Director of Victorian Seniors Festival, which he manages so successfully each year. And another wonderful contributor to the Mental Health Foundation that allows so many of our programs to be successful, such as our food delivery program, where we have delivered in excess of 90,000 meals over the last 12 months. Mr. Bruce Wong, Chief Executive Officer of Foot Solutions. The Victorian population is continuing to age. Current generations of older people are living longer on average than prior generations. and this trend is expected to continue. The number of people aged 65 years and over is predicted to almost triple by 2051. Those aged over 85 are the fastest growing population demographic group in Australia. Now that's a direct quote from a remarkable document, Aging Well in a Changing World, produced by the Commissioner for Senior Victorians and speaker today, Gerard Mansour. It's a remarkable document and I recommend its reading to everyone in the audience today. Yet we live in a very much youth-oriented culture, and the needs of senior Australians can be easily overlooked or unfortunately ignored altogether. We tend to forget, as Abraham Lincoln so pithily stated, in the end, it's not the years in your life that count, it's the life in your years. I'll repeat that. It's the life in your years, the quality of the life you lead. Our expert speakers and panelists today will identify and discuss the challenges of putting better quality of life in those years and the key needs which can be identified and addressed in making our extra years of life that improved mental health care can give us more fulfilling, productive, and of course, mentally healthy. Perhaps from today's forum, we will be better able to understand how we can help our seniors achieve better purpose and meaning, and with a positive attitude, navigate the rapidly changing world and circumstances of our 21st century. Thank you, Vasan. Back to you.
You're on mute.
Still learning. 30 days over, still haven't learned enough. That shows that I'm part of the seniors program. Now I would like to introduce Mr. Gerard Mansour, Commissioner for Senior Victorians, Ambassador for Elder Abuse Prevention. With over 30 years of leadership experience within the age and community services sectors, Gerard was appointed as the inaugural Commissioner for Senior Victorians in 2013. Gerard Mansour is an outstanding advocate for senior Victorians, respected, considered, and knowledgeable about the issues facing older people. Former Minister for Disability, Aging and Care, Honorable Luke Donaldson said, as a Commissioner, Gerard provides advice to the government on the needs and interests of senior Victorians, particularly those who are vulnerable, at risk of disadvantaged. Gerard is continuing his work with the Victorian government to promote the important role that senior Victorians play in our community. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Gerard Mansour for an address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vasan, for that lovely introduction and welcome. And I'm delighted to be able to join you all here today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many different lands that we're meeting on today. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people from the Kulin Nation, and welcome any Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging who might be with us today. Today, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a snapshot about a recent report that I published at the end of last year about aging well in a changing world. And for me, the unique value of this piece of work is that it's built on the voices of older people. It tells us how older people themselves see what the journey of aging well looks like. And so I've got great pleasure today in just giving you a snapshot of some of the things that I learned. If I could have the next slide, thanks. So I was very fortunate to have a two-part methodology, and we had nearly 5,000 older people fill in an online survey. And I had older people through a face-to-face consultation session from 27 different local government areas across Victoria. And I had people of all different capacities and strengths and backgrounds and understandings. And from that great depth of sharing by so many older people, we're able to build this little profile of 8 key attributes of aging well. And I don't think there's any better time to stop and reflect on this piece of work than just now, from certainly from a Melbourne and New South Wales and Victorian perspective. I think for so many of us and so many Victorian seniors that have been in some sort of level of lockdown due to COVID, or older people that are naturally still concerned about their well-being, I think that this piece of work can help give some heart and some guidance about what it means for us to return back to some sort of sense of safety and connections. And today, I'm just going to touch on 3 of the key attributes to give you some insights into how I think older people are currently approaching the whole experience of dealing with COVID. If I could go to the next slide, thanks. So the first one that I wanted to touch on was the sense of having meaning and purpose in life. This is just so central for all of us as we age. And I think the critical thing that occurs here from a mental health and a wellbeing perspective is many of us don't really stop and think about this. We don't necessarily sit down in a room and say to ourselves, oh, I wonder what it is that's going to give us meaning and purpose in life. But from the stories and the life stories that people have very generously and kindly shared with me, it's almost certain that for us as we get older, the things that motivate us and drive us are actually going to change and modify in some way. And whether we talk about it as the things that give us the bounce in our step to inspire us to engage every day, whether it's the things that motivate us as a volunteer. And in the report, I tried to get a snapshot of the voices of people. And here's one of the quotes. Someone talked about enjoying life, getting involved in your community, socializing with other people, joining groups, getting out and traveling. And so a really important part of a healthy approach to aging is seeing that we've still got something to contribute. We're still worthwhile citizens, people that are valuable because of their life experience. And for many of us, this is a thing that we just do and adapt to and continue to innovate. But unfortunately, not for everybody. For some people, this can be a real jar, a real challenge. It could occur through a change in our role. A lot of people that shared their stories with me talked about, for example, the move from being in the paid workforce or doing volunteering work and then moving into retirement in a different way, and that the role they had in sort of the work or unpaid work suddenly changed in some way. Or it could be the role in the family. I can remember a male in his late 60s saying that for him, he hadn't really come to terms with the changing nature of the role in his own family. And that up till then, he'd always been the go-to person, and now it's his children that were telling him what to do. And I think, the things that give us meaning and purpose in drive can be so different and varied for all of us. And a really important part of life is being open to the fact that that can change in some way. For many of us, there is an increasing interest in life planning, say in planning for finances or the next thing in an early phase of retirement. But one of the things that I did learn through this piece of work is adding to our planning and to our thinking what gives us meaning and purpose in life is a really an important part of us to think for the future. If I go on to the next slide, thanks. So the next thing I wanted to touch on, and this is just such a central thing to our well-being, isn't it? And something that's been jarred in so many ways during the whole experience of COVID, and I think will continue to, is the connections with family and friends and society. It's so important to our well-being to maintain those relationships and connections. And one of the things that clearly has happened during the lockdown and the lockout of states and our inability to move through our own state and our own country is what does that mean for the things that are people that are really close to us. But here has been one of the positives, I must say, and the fact that I'm talking with you today via Zoom. I've really been inspired by the number of older people that have more recently shared their stories and said to me that they've engaged with things like the Zoom platform for the first time. It's only a few weeks ago that I attended a Zoom graduation session that one of the local councils in Melbourne had organised. And I had 20 people who had used Zoom for the first time, many in their 80s and many from a non-English speaking background, and how excited they were that they could master the fact that they could now communicate it on Zoom. And one of the most common things they said in that particular graduation session was, now that I learned how to do that, I'm confident I can learn more. And so I think what Zoom has done for some of us has opened up a whole new world and a whole new way of communication. But of course, I have great fear and sadness for the people that find that still enormously challenging and will rely on face-to-face connections. And I think there are some very practical challenges that our groups are going to confront as we re-emerge to social connections over the next few months in Melbourne and, through the rest of Australia. How comfortable are people going to be about returning to face-to-face connections and contact? Not everybody is going to jump back to that in the same way. And so I think for us, the connections with family and friends are something that we must really importantly bear in mind as we think about COVID. If I go to the next slide, thanks. And the final one that I wanted to refer to, and this is the one, of course, that comes to mind when we think of mental health, is how we self-manage our health and our health conditions. One of the things that was very interesting when we, through the survey, asked people to rate what are the most important things to your well-being, one of the most highly rated responses was self-managing health. And so people want guidance, they want to know that there's support services available, but they also want a sense of independence and a sense of encouragement that what's the knowledge and the information that we can acquire that we can better manage our own health and our own well-being as we get older, and that includes our mental health. I think it is a challenge for some older people. My observation is there is a bit of a cultural issue. I think some of our younger generation and our adults talk more openly about mental health and mental health challenges than some of the older population. I think for some of us, that's still a significant barrier to be open and to share. And so I think this is a really good forum today for us to acknowledge that there are different pathways to support and services, and we can in fact allow assistance and support. And the first port of call are of course through our local and our close community connections. Now, if I go to the next slide, thanks. And I just wanted to finish with a couple of high-level observations about what's on the minds of some older people at the moment. There are a group of older people who do remain cautious. And they say to me things like, once you slow down, it was really hard to get re-engaged and to help to get started again. And so some people don't yet want to re-engage. And I think for us to know that not everybody in our friendship group or in our local groups in our local community is going to come out and re-engage. And just as an example, I did my walk this morning, and one of the ladies that I passed was in her late 70s, and she had her mask on. And as I walked past, and so did I, she stopped and she said to me, "Oh, can I just say something?" And I said, yeah. And she said, "I was really pleased to walk past somebody that's still got a mask on. I'm still concerned about the virus." And and so here's somebody that had just, passed me as a neighbour who is still feeling that re-emerging and that sense of uncertainty. And I think it's okay for people to be in that place. And we need to think of ways that we can connect and encourage those people to still participate in society in the best way they can. That there are certain impacts that are there for quite some time around lockdown. I think of all the Victorian and Australian citizens who live in residential aged care, who have been for so many months locked away from access to friends and family and connections. And as those services are opening up, I'd really encourage all of us to re-engage with those people that are living in residential aged care services to show them that we haven't forgotten about them. And a big congratulations and shout out from me to Chris Reedy, who's with us today, who took such a fantastic lead in pivoting the seniors program, the Seniors Festival last year, to make sure that we could broadcast some of those programs into residential aged care. And a big shout out, Chris, for the leadership that you showed in that regard. And the final thing is that sitting there in our community, there are still some concerns around isolation and loneliness, the fact that people are still going to need encouragement to rebuild their connections in our community. And that as we open up, remembering that it's a slow process for some people. Like every cohort, some older people will be amongst the first to re-emerge. But I remind us that some older people will be amongst the last. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerard, for your wonderful address and tips in relation to the seniors within Australia. This helps me. Currently, I'm working on establishing a first ever ethno-specific Indian aged care in Victoria. Thank you for your tips. And also I join you to congratulate Mr. Chris Reedy, who was a recipient of our Seniors Mental Health Award last year. Thank you, Gerard. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Judy Tang, clinical neuropsychologist and one of our Mental Health Foundation's multicultural ambassador. With more than a decade of career and academic expertise in clinical neuropsychology, Dr. Tang is a director and clinical neuropsychologist with German Health, which provides neuropsychological assessments and neuromusculoskeletal treatment. Here, she is aligned with government services, community organizations, various law firms, and insurance companies. Dr. Tang has previously worked with the Lincoln Center for Research on Aging, researching persons with dementia and their carers, as well as the ACAS Valuation Unit. Her majesty of quantitative research has been utilized on the state and national level for its aged care assessment program. In addition to speaking frequently at professional seminars and conferences around the world, Dr. Tang has also published in numerous journals on such topics as healthy aging, anxiety and pain, and dementia. Dr. Tang is a current board director of Victorian Pride Centre and is also Multicultural Commissioner for the Victorian Multicultural Commission. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Judy Tang for the keynote address.
Hi, everyone. And thank you so much for that, Hassan. And thank you, everyone, for having me today. I also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm coming from today, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. And I acknowledge that the land has never been ceded and always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So I know you've got an amazing panel of speakers today, so I'm very excited to hear from everyone else. I will try to be brief and I'll really share with you, if it works. I thought I'd start with you to bust some myths, the difference between healthy aging and unhealthy aging or pathological aging. So the first one that a lot of people think is that they think it's normal for your memory to become bad as you grow older. And what we found as researchers in science and all that kind of stuff is that that's actually not true. It's okay to make a bad decision once in a while. We all have had bad days before. We all forget some things every now and then, but it's not okay when it becomes something that to the point that you forget things much more consistently, or you know, your bad day, it just happens much more frequently. So when something like that happens, it's actually important to access or visit your GP and try and get some more understanding of what might be happening for you. So there is a difference. It's not normal for a person's memory to become bad as a person grows older. That's a myth. Secondly, there's a lot of people who actually think as you grow older, you can't learn new things. And in fact, that is also false as well. In fact, there's a lot of research to show that it's very important that we continue to learn things as we grow older because it's good for our brains. Things like learning a new language, learning a musical instruments, getting into dancing, increasing your physical activity, all these kind of things that help learn are really, really good for you and good for your brain health as you get older. And not only that, even maintaining your social interaction, your friendships, forming new friendships, that's also a form of learning and brain training as well. So it's really important to have those social connections even as you grow older as well. So that's a myth too. Older adults can't learn new things. In fact, they can learn many new things and they probably learn much better as we grow older because they have skills on how to better learn things as well. Thirdly, there are people who still think, and it's a myth, that all older adults eventually get dementia as if that's the end stage of where it is. So like I said before, as it's not normal for your memory to become bad as you grow older, it's also not normal for older adults to eventually get dementia. Certainly as we all grow older, there is an increased risk of dementia. It tends to happen more often as we grow older, but it's nothing that definitely happens as you grow old. So that's false as well. And it's very important to remember these three myths. So briefly, I just talked about what is dementia. Sorry, I talked about dementia. So let's really talk about what is dementia. And I won't go into it too much because Dementia Australia, which you can find at dementia.org.au, has a lot of really, really good information there. But what it is, like I said before, is it's a type of unhealthy aging. It's not normal aging. So dementia affects your thinking, your behavior, and your ability to perform everyday tasks. And the brain function is actually affected enough to interfere with a person's normal social or work life. And unfortunately, there's no cure for dementia. We're still trying to understand it, and we are understanding it more and more as we delve into it. But like I said, it's not a part of normal aging. And when we go back to the table that I showed you all before, here are some examples. So for example, in normal aging, it's okay to make a bad decision once in a while. But in Alzheimer's disease, which is a type of dementia, if you consistently make poor judgments and decisions a lot of the time, that's something to get checked out for. Same thing here, missing a monthly payment, that's normal. We always forget a few things here and there, and that's okay. I know I do it too, and I like to think I'm not getting that old yet. But if you have lots of problems taking care of monthly bills, again, that's something to look into. And then sometimes we forget what day it is, and we might remember it later. But then if you consistently lose track of the time or date or year, or if your family has noticed that, that's something to get checked out as well. And then with normal aging, sometimes forgetting which word to use from time to time is okay. That's normal. It happens all the time. But if it becomes where a person that you know is having trouble maintaining a conversation, getting lots and lots and lots of words muddled up, that's something to look into as well. And lastly, we all lose things from time to time. I always misplace my phone from time to time. I wonder where I find it, and sometimes it's in really interesting places. But if you're consistently, or if someone that you know is consistently misplacing things and being unable to find them much more than what would be considered normal, again, that's something to get checked out as well. So dementia, not part of normal aging. Let's quickly talk about mental health for older adults. Gerard Monsieur did talk about the report, and it's a really fantastic and comprehensive report. And there was a brief mention around the risk of isolation and also depression. So that's one of the things to look out for, is with the increased risk of isolation, there can be poorer mental health as a result of it. But another myth that I didn't put in there is that sometimes people assume that older adults just become unhappier as they grow older. In fact, that's been shown to not be the case. It's been found that older adults are actually happier than younger people. And so people try to find out why that might be the case. And one of the reasons they think might be is that older people are much able to brush off life's small stresses and accumulate a valuable thing called wisdom. So being emotionally stable and compassionate, knowing yourself and being able to make smart social decisions is what researchers think might be one of the reasons why older adults, or as we grow older, we tend to become a bit more confident or a bit more happier with where we are at in life and learn not to sweat the small stuff. I still feel, and I know that Professor Sunil Bar, who you have as a panel speaker later, will definitely speak to this as well. And you're very lucky to be hearing from Professor Bar. There are still some improvements that we can work towards with regards to having better mental health for older adults. So, and the first one is the need for improved counselling access and services in residential aged care. Secondly, I feel like there's still a bit of improvement that we could work on, is to better understand and provide mental health for intersectionalities. And what I mean by that is, for example, with regards to improvements in medical advances and treatments and all that, a lot of people with disabilities are actually living longer. So then we need to make sure how we can provide appropriate support and services and facilitate good mental health for people with disabilities as they grow older. Then also another intersectionality is older age and multiculturalism. So if someone comes from a different cultural background, we need to better understand and provide mental health services for those so that it is culturally appropriate and suitable for those older adults as well. And lastly, that's why I started to open up with the myths. We need to avoid the myths of aging, because those myths might actually be a barrier for older adults to access better mental health care. For example, I talked about before, you know, some people think that it's just an expectation that as you grow older, you might be more lonely or get more depressed. And that's a myth that we just talked about before. And if they think that, it might impact on their ability to go out and seek mental health services and support. So remember, need to avoid the myths of aging because that can be a barrier to mental health care. And that's what I have to share. But again, thank you very much for having me. And I look forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Judy Tang, for the excellent address, and thank you for your ongoing support to Mental Health Foundation and being with us this morning. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Beverly Smith, Executive General Manager, Residential Communities, Independent and Assisted Living at Australian Unity. Beverly is an Executive General Manager of Residential Communities at Australian Unity. The portfolio comprises of 14 standalone retirement communities and 10 care-located aged care and retirement community precincts across Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, and a pipeline of healthy aging precinct developments. For the last decade, Australian Unity's award-winning Better Together small household model has enabled older Australians to age well through a continuum of healthcare, age-friendly housing, a human connection. Her leadership inspires and champions the culture around delivering meaningful customer and employee outcomes. Her commercial focus optimizes performance of the existing business from which is fund new growth platforms such as innovative business models, strategic partnerships, mergers and acquisitions. Beverly's experience as a commercial lawyer brings deep capability in corporate governance and risk-weighted decision-making process. Welcome, Beverly. Over to you.
Lovely. Thank you, Vasan, and good afternoon, everyone. Excuse me. Thank you very much for having me today. I would also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today. For me, that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We value their cultures, identities, and continuing connection to country, waters, kin, and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and are committed to making a positive contribution to the well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people by providing services that are welcoming, safe, and culturally appropriate. I would also like to recognise the work of the Mental Health Foundation Australia and their great work in the mental health space. Mental Health Month, held in each October, gives us the opportunity to raise awareness around mental health and well-being, and it gives us a chance to promote the activities and ideas which can have a positive impact on our daily lives and the lives of others. I've been asked today to speak to you about the impacts of seniors' mental health, which is a topic very close to my heart. The business I lead forms part of Australian Unity's independent and assisted living division, and we operate retirement communities and aged care, as well as offering allied health, Indigenous and disability services. We offer preventative health and chronic disease management services through a wholly owned subsidiary, Remedy Healthcare, and direct healthcare services through our dental clinics. These businesses are all interconnected, seeking to deliver a continuum of accommodation and care service that addresses the daily needs of our customers. As you are all aware, Australia is one of the most culturally diverse nations in the world, with a significant proportion of Australia's population born overseas. So it's critical that we provide services and programs specifically tailored to meet the mental health needs of our culturally and linguistically diverse communities. At Australian Unity, we have been developing specific healthcare and wellbeing services for culturally and linguistically diverse Australians, and I'd like to share one of those examples with you today around Indigenous wellbeing. Approximately 1 in 3 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people experience high to very high levels of psychological distress, a number that's 2.5 times that of other Australians. Aboriginal people experience a suicide rate that is double the non-Indigenous rate. And so as a nation, we need to improve our efforts to address these inequalities and not just close the gap, but exceed the gap. Yet despite these alarming statistics, there is a lack of mental health support services available to meet the needs of Indigenous people that have been designed in a way that truly meets their needs in a culturally appropriate way. Australian Unity has met our ongoing commitment to the health and wellbeing needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through a recent Healing Minds initiative. It's an initiative that's been jointly developed with our Indigenous Services and Remedy Healthcare divisions. And it's a culturally sensitive adaptation of our MindStep mental health program. It's a confidential phone-based mental health coaching program for Aboriginal people, developed by Aboriginal people and delivered by Aboriginal coaches. It's a program that has been launched this year, and we also plan to adapt the program for other culturally and linguistically diverse groups of Australians. Gerard Monsor mentioned just before the significant impact of COVID-19 across our community, and in particular, how this is impacting for older Australians. Throughout our 180-year history, we've been supporting Australians through times of war, financial upheaval, and natural disaster. And today we once again face into a lifetime pandemic that's setting some very unique challenges. But as an organisation, our response has remained the same. From the outset of the pandemic, we've responded comprehensively by supporting the wellbeing of our members, customers, employees. And our efforts to date have resulted in the minimising of the worst of the human and financial impacts caused by the pandemic. Our immediate focus is on the health and wellbeing of the 50,000 plus Australians and more than 5,000 employees across our businesses of Australian Unity. And I would just like to endorse Gerard's comments about the importance of engaging with people living in aged care and supporting those individuals through social connection as our communities reach high levels of double vaccination, and that we're able to engage once again in face-to-face contact and communications with people in residential aged care. Our rapidly ageing population is an issue of national importance for all Australians. It's true that while the aged care sector has been under intense scrutiny for the past few years, in particular through the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety, a spotlight has been shown on cases where elderly people have been let down by those charged with caring for them. While that has been uncomfortable, this scrutiny is critical if we are to improve the standards and stamp out unacceptable practices. And we should never lose sight of the close to 366,000 workers in this sector who are committed to doing the right thing for elderly people who rely on their care and support. And if anything, and certainly what we've seen in our businesses, this pandemic has only underlined how deep the commitment of our employees and our team members runs, even if it means at times that they've put their own health at risk by continuing to come to work to support residents in aged care. Pleasingly, one of the findings from the Royal Commission was a recommendation about accommodation models designed to improve aged care outcomes for residents. In particular, recommendation 45 of the final report put very strong endorsement around small household models of accommodation. The Commission has found that good design in residential aged care, particularly for people who are living with dementia, usually involve smaller, low-density congregate living arrangements rather than the larger, more institutional settings. In general, people move into residential aged care because of changes in their functional capability when it makes living in their own home unsafe. Once in residential care, people continue their habits of a lifetime and they want to maintain the choice and control over what matters in their daily lives, including being involved in the daily routines of a home, connecting with families, friends, and community. In 2012, Australian Unity began implementing a holistic new model called Better Together to meet these expectations. And this model features a strong focus on the health and well-being of residents through modular domestic scale household floor plates and greater consistency of staffing rostered to each of those households. This environment is where customers are most likely to feel connected with their carers and other customers, and they can engage in those daily living activities that they have always enjoyed. Those residents are encouraged to assist in daily activities like meal preparation or assisting with folding of laundry, those sorts of activities that feel very normal and natural for people. Over the recent years, Australian Unity have been modernising all of our portfolio with 5 of the current 7 aged care homes built to this floor plate. And it is certainly a model that we see continuing to provide the best outcomes for residents. Importantly, there is research emerging from overseas, particularly in the US, that these small households, smaller congregate living with dedicated rostering models actually result in a much better outcome from a COVID perspective. And that is something that certainly we have seen across the Victorian experience last year. Personal wellbeing appears to increase as people age, and in research that Australian Unity has been part of over the last 20 years with Deakin University, the results show that the most satisfied Australians are in fact the people aged over 65, and that their wellbeing is highly influenced by their relationships, their interactions with others, and their connection to community. This positive connection actually seems to offset their lower satisfaction with health, which declines as they age. Australian Unity's Wellbeing Index shows that life satisfaction scores of the nation's retirees are significantly higher than those not retired, something we can all look forward to. It suggests that older adult years are enjoyable and fulfilling time for many Australians. And this, the research tends to suggest that because retirement is a time when people can step back a little from life's responsibilities, they get to enjoy more of the quality time in their life. At Australian Unity, we operate co-located retirement living and aged care with the view of providing retirees those options across that continuum as their ageing and care needs change. In closing, Australian Unity is a company founded on social values and community contribution, and we are committed to building and promoting positive mental health strategies. Mental Health Month is a really important opportunity to raise that awareness about the impacts of mental ill health and the range of supports that can be available to improve someone's well-being. Whether they're living in retirement or aged care, it's something that we should continue to aspire to. And I'm committed to ensuring that we will continue to develop a number of innovative ways for people to access services and support that help alleviate their mental health symptoms. Thank you, Vasan.
Thank you, Beverly, and especially thank you to Australian Unity for your ongoing support to Mental Health Foundation Australia to strengthen our awareness campaign throughout the nation once again.
Thank you.
Now I would like to introduce Professor Sunil Bar, a professor of psychology at Swinburne University of Technology. He is co-director of Wellbeing Clinic for Older Adults, Swinburne University's mental health counseling clinic for older people living in residential aged care homes. He leads an active research lab focusing on emotional well-being of older adults. His research focuses on application of reminiscence and cognitive behavioral therapies for older people living with depression, anxiety, or dementia. He has won over $2 million in research grants to examine the well-being of older adults living in residential aged care settings. He is a diplomat of Academy of Cognitive Therapies. Having worked with Aaron Back, MD, for a number of years to investigate adaptation of cognitive behavioral therapy for older adults. Alongside his research and teaching interests, Professor Brar has maintained a clinical practice for over 20 years. Please join me in welcoming Professor Sunil Brar.
Thank you very much, Hassan. It's a pleasure to be here today and to spend a few minutes talking about a program that we've been running in aged care for a few months. Over the next few minutes, I'd like to talk about some of our learnings in trying to offer telehealth counseling and support services to the aged care sector, particularly the older adults living in nursing homes, and share with you some of our learnings and reflections, and to provide an overview of some of the challenges that we've discovered COVID has brought to the residential aged care sector. Of course, I'd like to join with my colleagues in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're speaking from today and from which we're joining from today. As many of you know, there are nearly 3,000 residential aged care facilities all across Australia, and currently these facilities accommodate approximately 200,000 older adults. What is perhaps less known is just the level or prevalence of mental health problems within the residential aged care sector. More than 50% of aged care residents have significant mental health issues, whether it be depression, levels of anxiety, severe loneliness, and of course, cognitive impairment. And yet the access to mental health support is very, very poor. And the aged care mental health workforce is very, very small. In fact, it's very difficult, right, to know who to refer older people to for psychological counseling or services. The impact of COVID-19 on the mental health of the aged care resident has been absolutely devastating. In fact, the case fatality in residential aged care is 30 times that of people living in the community. Most of the deaths that we've had from COVID-19 have been of aged care residents. And for that reason, it's very, very understandable, isn't it, just how frightened the residential aged care community has been because of COVID-19. As one facility manager told us middle of last year, having just been through an outbreak in COVID-19, we have witnessed firsthand the impact of social isolation, fear, and anxiety has had on residents, such as weight loss, decreased mobility, and depression. Late last year, we ran Australia's first survey on the impact of COVID-19 on the mental health of Australian residential aged care residents and staff. We sent surveys to all the facilities in Australia, and we asked senior staff about their perceptions of the impact that COVID has had on the mental health of residents and also their staff colleagues. And what this diagram shows us very clearly is that the impact has been absolutely so significant. More than 40% of aged care residents have responded to COVID with increased loneliness. More than 30% of residents have had increased levels of anxiety and stress. More than 20% an increase in depression, and then 20% an increase in challenging behaviors. And perhaps most worryingly so, between 5 and 10% of aged care residents have responded to COVID with increased levels of suicide or death ideation. And the impact of COVID on staff has been equally significant. Now, at Swinburne University, we've been running a wellbeing clinic for older adults for more than 10 years, and our services have traditionally been face-to-face, and we've provided support to aged care residents, their families, and their staff to try and really bring psychological services to a sector which traditionally has had very little access. We've also been very, very keen to upskill and train staff within the sector and essentially to build the workforce of the future so that we'd have more psychologists, more counselors, and more social workers who are working in this area to provide mental health services to older people living in care. But of course, because of COVID and the various restrictions that were placed on going into facilities, we had to change our services, just like many of you have had to change your services to telehealth and to provide services in a virtual way. And so since the 15th of May, 2020, we've offered telehealth counselling and support services across Australia. And these services have been completely free and uncapped and open to really anyone connected to the aged care sector, whether it be aged care residents, their staff, or in fact their families. And all of our services were provided by postgraduate psychology and counselling students. Now, we received a whole variety of referrals, but the main ones were people living with levels of anxiety, panic attacks, worries, aged care residents who were feeling lonely and isolated, those who were experiencing grief or depression or even suicidality. And families would often call in feeling very angry and conflictual about the restrictions that were in place. On the one hand, they could understand why aged care facilities were closing their doors, so to speak, to families coming in. But on the other hand, they were extremely distressed with the distance that created between themselves and their loved ones living in care. And so what did we do? Well, we supported the residents and the families and staff by listening to what they were going through. We provided cognitive behavioral treatment to address some of their inaccuracies in how they were thinking or in just learning about their beliefs. We provided reminiscence therapy to aged care residents. And of course, we managed their anxiety by providing them with strategies and tips so that they felt less anxious and perhaps were able to deal with their worries. We received more than 350 referrals from all around Australia. Close to 100 nursing homes or residential care facilities referred their clients to us. 70% of them were from Victoria, and perhaps that makes sense given that we are a Victorian-based service. 21% of those referrals came from rural and regional locations, and this is important because people living in country Australia perhaps have even more difficulty accessing mental health services. Most of our referrals were aged care residents, and we provided more than 2,000 sessions of counselling. We did some evaluation on the impact of counselling services for aged care residents, and we found that residents who were able to receive some level of counselling for us, an average of about 6 sessions, experienced improvements in terms of their depression, anxiety, and loneliness. And this challenges some of our stereotypes, isn't it? That counselling is not something that's effective for older adults. We certainly found that we could bring about some significant changes through counselling via telehealth. We've been very lucky enough to be supported by philanthropy and by research foundations. And last year, we're very lucky to be recognised by HESTA's Team Excellence Award as well. And we remain the largest training clinic in the aged care mental health space currently in Australia. So what are the challenges and learnings that we discovered through this project that we've now been running for more than a year? Firstly, aged care residents can utilize telehealth. Most, in fact, do prefer video conferencing over the telephone. However, most residents do need some help in connecting via video conferencing by staff. Telehealth, of course, is not suitable for everyone. So we've had difficulties with people who have trouble with vision, for example, or with speaking. And in many facilities, the technology is still insufficient. The connection is still very weak. There are issues with privacy, consent, and risk. Some residents don't like telehealth. They prefer face-to-face. But nevertheless, this is still a feasible way of providing counselling within the sector. So in closing, what are the 4 big issues going forward? Well, number one, aged care residents are still caught between 2 systems, the aged care system, which is often federally funded, and then the mental health system, which is state. However, telehealth is here to stay. We need to learn how this technology can be made easier and more accessible to people living in residential aged care, including those with cognitive issues, language barriers, and frailty. Thirdly, aged care residents who are most disadvantaged in terms of accessing on-site mental health services are those living in rural and regional areas. And so telehealth will be especially important to these residents. And we do need a pipeline of mental health practitioners who are interested and trained to work in aged care. So if you are watching or listening to this and you would like some assistance, or you would like to refer your residents or family members or staff for help, you can certainly do so to our service. And if you would like more training in mental health and aging, you can certainly access these for free through our fortnightly webinars. And there are a whole bunch of other services, of course, that you can access. And here are just a few of them that you can point your residents to if you would like some support. So thank you very much for the few minutes of your time. I'll hand you back to the team. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Professor Sunil Bar, for your support and joining us today. I really enjoyed your presentation. Looking forward to working with you in the future. Now we have heard from all these experts. It's time we move on to the panel discussion. Now I would like to invite back our Vice Chairperson, Mr. Jim Gooden, to moderate this panel discussion. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Vasan. Firstly, I want to say how delighted I am to have such a range of expert panelists at our disposal to discuss these really important issues. I can't imagine a more knowledgeable group to help us all learn the vital messages regarding seniors' mental health, aiding our understanding of the issues and hopefully better addressing them. The panel will hopefully be able to take questions from our virtual viewers as well as from our general discussion. So please use the Q&A function to ask your questions. We may not be able to answer all of the Q&A questions put to us, but we will give it a try. If you wish to address your question to a particular panelist, please make that clear in your question. Also to our panelists, please feel free to add your own insights and experiences at any time during the questions raised. I'd like to start off, as we haven't heard from Chris Reedy. He has been congratulated by Gerard Mansour, and I also want to congratulate him on his role as director of the hugely successful Seniors Festival over many years. Chris, what would you say have been the major achievements of this annual event in your view?
Thank you for the introduction. And look, you can see I'm in my car. Like many Victorians, I'm taking the opportunity to connect up with family and friends. I had breakfast with 3 of my adult children today for the first time in 6 months. So I'm feeling quite elated. But back to the festival, I think one of the key achievements which links into the discussion today is that we provide a really good platform for some great organisations. Some of them have been mentioned today, like Dementia Australia, like Mental Health Foundation Australia, during the month of October each year to reach out to a very large audience. There are more than 1 million seniors card holders in Victoria. Reflecting on the last 2 years, and Gerard referred to the aged care work, and we just heard a brilliant presentation there about mental health and aged care. We've recognised, probably late, but we have now recognised how important it is that our 55,000 residents in Victoria of aged care facilities are part of the festival. And we're moving now into face-to-face opportunities as we come out of along the roadmap and running a number of projects with them across the full year. The festival has become something that peaks in October, but now can operate throughout the year in connection with aged care facilities. And that's a really positive, important thing to come out of the COVID era. And overall, the festival is an opportunity for us to reach out to more isolated Victorians through our key partners, councils being number one, to reach out to people, to give them an opportunity which they might have been found difficult to make use of, partly through financial situations or their geographical location, or indeed their mental health, working with key partners to make sure that all older Victorians get those opportunities. So thank you. That's the overview.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Now, a point that has been dealt with by most of our speakers has been the problem of isolation and loneliness that our seniors can experience. And I was taken by a quote that I read, or a statement I read from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare that was recently released, and it stated that lacking social connections carries a risk that is comparable and in many cases exceeds that of other well-accepted risk factors, including smoking up to 15 cigarettes per day, obesity, physical activity, and air pollution. Now that's putting in the context, I think, a very good way, what we often consider as just being a purely mental issue of loneliness, if you like, or emotional issue in a physical context. I was struck by that. Would anyone care to make comment about that? That lacking social connection carries a risk that's compatible to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Certainly consistent, Jim, with my findings and my research. And when you look at the international literature about the impact of isolation and loneliness, I think one of the really good things I learned from the international literature is that it can be dealt with. That's the positive thing, with the right interventions and the right approaches. And as a result of the report, Jim, that I released in 2016, Aging is Everyone's Business, and I named isolation and loneliness as one of the emerging, important issues for us to deal with. One of the things we're able to do is start to build on that evidence base of what are the types of interventions that make a difference. And if I could just mention a couple of those, because I think it's important to see isolation and loneliness as something we can deal with. One is that one of the challenges for service providers, and great presentation today by Australian Unity of the great leadership they're doing, is that many older people actually know older people that are isolated and lonely. And one of the challenges is the pathways to find them. Of course, if someone's living on their own in their own home and concerned and not going out much and disconnected, one of the real challenges can be, how do we actually find those? And so there can be pathways, and encouraging friends and others to talk openly about the issue of isolation and loneliness and actually put it on the table. The second is that there are a lot of opportunities for older people to connect with groups, and we heard the importance of, as we get older, being prepared to innovate and try and test new things. And with the right supports, older people can in fact join those organisations. What I found was there was a low level of understanding by many older people about what was actually available in their own community. So for a lot of them, the barrier is actually a lack of knowledge. They have an interest in a particular area. What they don't know is there's something in their community can actually fulfill that, or they don't have a deep understanding. They might have heard, for example, a reference to men's sheds, or they might have heard a reference to the University of the Third Age, but they don't know what that means in practice. I'm reminded I was holding a forum in Fawkner. And so for those people that don't know Fawkner, it's a very multicultural area. I actually grew up in that area. And on one side, I had a Greek family. On the other side, I had an Italian family. Now, in the room on that particular day, this is only going back a couple of years, I had probably about 100 older people. And so as we were chatting, and they were saying a very similar thing about the lack of opportunities in their area. And so I just asked them a question. How many of you have heard of the University of the Third Age? And less than 10 hands went up. So I think there's that gap between I have an interest, but I don't know what's actually available in my community, or I need some encouragement and someone to assist me and guide me into making those connections. So there's some of the things that I've learned, Jim, in my work.
That's a really important factor, to have somebody assist and guide them towards those ways of making social connection, Jared. Hello?
Sorry, Jim, can I just say, someone's just put in the chat about the report. Yeah, so the report that I did was called Aging is Everyone's Business, and we could put that into the chat, those that might be interested. It's available on the Seniors Online website, Jim.
Yes, all right. Good.
I'd like to make comments about loneliness in nursing homes.
Please.
Up to about 40% of residents don't get any visitors. That's not a COVID thing, that's just a general thing. And it defies our stereotypes that surely people who live within an institution and a community will not be feeling lonely, and yet loneliness is extremely, extremely high within residential aged care. However, the antidote to loneliness is not to keep them busy at all. It's like Gerard said, to connect them with something that they're interested in, to resonate with their values and their sense of identity. And one of the ways in which we could do this is by pairing volunteers with the aged care resident so that the volunteer can find out who the resident is and help to create a digital story or a life book, which then can be shared with the facility staff. And it's on the basis of knowing who the resident is that activities can be then created and curated. So it's not about just shipping a resident off to bingo or on bus trips. It's about trying to design activities that resonate with the resident's sense of identity. And so we've often found that the antidote to loneliness is not simply company or social connection, but it's visibility of identity. It's about connecting activities with who the resident is. And that's not as easy as it sounds. There's a huge rhetoric, isn't there, in the field about person-centered care. But if you don't know who the person is, how can you curate activities to be person-centered? And this is a huge problem within residential aged care with depleted staffing, transient staff workforces, and extremely time-poor workforces. They simply do not have the time, as we've discovered it, to get to know the resident. So this is really a call to action to have creative ways of trying to find out who the person is so that you can develop relevant activities.
I imagine it to be important in terms of culturally and linguistically diverse communities where staff may not be aware of the particular activities or interests of that cultural or linguistic group.
I also know that Sunil, the amazing work that you do, it also creates a deeper connection between the staff and the residents and at the residential aged care, which then also helps counter against loneliness, because now they feel like they've formed a closer bond. So I think they're definitely, with all the great work that you do, long-term lasting effects, rather than, again, like you said, just go shipping off to bingo for an hour or two. Now they've developed those closer relationships within the space that can now perhaps feel feel a bit more at home at.
What really strikes me is we're not talking about a monolithic block of people when we're talking about senior Victorians or Australians. Where certainly the distinction has been made between the over 60-year-old retirees that are reasonably happy, have a sense of perhaps achievement in their life. They have experience and maybe degree of wisdom that's been used. And then we're talking about people like Professor Sunil has discussed, 50% of whom in residential care have severe mental health problems. So there is a real gap, obviously, in terms of needs between just those two groups. And I'm sure there are many subgroups that we could divide it up further in terms of our seniors. What sort of problems does that prevent in terms of providing for our seniors? Open question to anyone.
I was wanting to respond to a couple of points, one that Gerard made and one that Sona made, was that in terms of connecting older people up into their local communities, the role of positive ageing officers in local councils shouldn't be underestimated. This was a program that was initially funded through the Home and Community Care program at a federal level, and every council had a positive ageing officer. That direct funding is no longer available, but probably half Victorian councils do have a positive ageing officer, and they're a very key person at a local level where organisations should be working with. Gerard's been associated with them. Organisations need to tap into that resource for council because they're the ones who spend their working life connecting people up. And secondly, within aged care facilities, I totally agree that the telling of one's story is so important. Gerard's involved with a project with us called Recognising Senior Victorians. Our connections into aged care are at the activity coordinator level. Most facilities have an activity or lifestyle coordinator. I find them very important people within the organisation. They're generally permanent and are there for a number of years. And they're the ones who actually have the time to get to know and understand their residents. And the telling of their stories has been so important. We're doing our second series now, and because it enables those stories to be heard by any generation of Victorians, but also it does provide huge positive feedback and support to the storyteller, that their story is being listened to. So they're two important things that I think to be aware of, those particular job roles within councils and within facilities. Thanks, Jim.
Beverly, you've spoken about the aged-friendly housing, smaller households, dedicated rostered models and staff. Might that be go some way to be a solution towards our seniors being able to have their stories heard, being able to have more individualised programs, etc. Is that your experience with your 14 standalone facilities Australian Unity runs?
Look, certainly that's very much the case and the principle behind the small household model. It's intended to bring everything down to a much more familiar, domesticated scale. And so, residents are far more likely to form relationships within those smaller groups. The way the homes are set out, even things like the attention down to the dinner table and how that's set up is all about encouraging that social connection. I think, as others have said, though, it's really important that the model is built around the individual. So, again, part of the ethos of a small household is that the rostering of staff is on a much better ratio of resident to carer, and consistency of that rostering, so that the carers have the opportunity to form that relationship and truly get to understand the individual, their day-to-day preferences, who they are as a person, their life story. And that is then able to be built into conversation much more naturally, and certainly the activities or preferences that those individuals have during the day. So I think certainly in terms of the Royal Commission, I understand that their research had a very broad remit. They visited overseas to innovative models, and that's how they've landed on that small household as being the preferred model for residential aged care going forward. And I think it's how we continue to innovate that around that in terms of connecting community, those variety of services. We've also had experience with the University of the Third Age in our retirement villages. Again, it's how you find different ways in terms of physical connection and virtual connection to help bring people together.
We seem to be focusing in on the 2,000 people across Australia who are in some sort of aged care facility as being the group most in need. I guess that stems very much from Professor Sanalbar's excellent research. He's really highlighted some of the big problems. I am struck, and I continue to be struck by that 50% have serious mental health problems. That seems to be the need that is most urgently in need of being addressed.
Add to that, Jim, I think going forward, the challenge is going to shift. I think the short-term challenge for residential aged care, or short to medium term, is going to be balancing visitor access with managing COVID. It's going to be a very significant issue, because there's no doubt the overwhelming interest of families is to visit and connect with their loved ones in residential aged care. And not surprisingly, providers are very clear that their objective is to do that in a safe way. But I think the next generation, or the next group of issues, are actually about people in their own home. And I think one of the things that we have learned from COVID is the critical importance of local community and ethno-specific groups. And I'm just reminded of a piece of work that Australian Unity's been doing, and I've had a pleasure of connecting with them, that often people's experiences of mental health and loneliness and challenges in life are very much informed by their own cultural backgrounds and their community backgrounds. And Australian Unity some years ago set up an alliance for the groups are more from the emerging communities, Filipino, Burmese, South Sudanese, etc. And I think one of the positive things that we've learned through COVID is that reaching out to those people through their local community leaders and groups like Australian Unity has convened, I think is a really important pathway, because I think the biggest issue in time is going to be if an older person happens to be living on their own, and they are the greatest proportion of people who live on their own are older people, and that those people are overly cautious about reconnecting, you can see how we can quite significantly shift upwards the amount of people experiencing isolation and loneliness. So, I think the sort of work Australian Unity and others are doing in leading the work with local community and diverse communities is a really important part of the solution.
I really see a synergy here with the emphasis that the Mental Health Foundation has taken too, in terms of linking in with various cultural and linguistic groups and looking at their particular needs, asking them what their particular needs are as far as mental health are concerned. We seem to be following a common path, whether it be looking at seniors' mental health or whether we just look at the general mental health of the community, which is very gratifying to know that we're probably all on the same track, so to speak. Judy, you raised some issues about stigma, receiving mental health treatment or assistance among older people. For example, is a 20-year-old more likely or more willing to seek treatment for depression than a 70-year-old? What are your thoughts on that? Is there an innate stigma in older people, if you want to term it that, about seeking mental health assistance and help?
Yeah, but I feel like the stigma probably is associated with just not having the opportunity to understand mental health. Because I feel like as time has gone by, we have more and more understanding about mental health and how to access services and what it's out there. So someone who is 20, for example, has much more knowledge on what depression, anxiety, and what services are out there already compared to someone who is 80 years old and not necessarily had made those connections or developed that understanding for it. So even if there were a stigma, there's also that access to information to support them to get that out there. That's where I think more than anything else.
Do you think that's in some way related to the fact that mental health, of course, and mental health issues are more well understood, perhaps in the community nowadays, more promoted than they were perhaps when the 70-year-old was 20, 50 years ago?
Yeah, exactly.
Have we progressed and improved in terms of getting the message out there about the importance of mental health?
Yeah, definitely. And, now with the internet and people learning over time how to access information on the internet, that information is much more readily available for people.
Jared, you made the point about the possibly being a reticence with elderly people getting out and making face-to-face contact, that there were challenges there, that people had maybe somehow become accustomed to communicating over the telephone or perhaps via Zoom or other ways, but might be reticent to actually get together face to face. Were you talking about in the sense of being concerned about getting COVID, or were you just thinking of it more in a psychological sense that that people aren't quite as comfortable face to face nowadays, that we're more reticent in view of COVID and our isolation experience to meet other people?
It's a good question. It's a complex issue that maybe just a couple of things. I think part of it's directly related to COVID, but of course it's informed by other things. It's informed by, what's our personality type? Are we somebody that enjoys more of an outgoing approach or a bit more of an introvert? So I've heard very common to the people that are finding it difficult are people that they're finding it very difficult to push themselves back into that environment because COVID has added a layer of concern. And so their question is, how do I safely reconnect? The other variable, and I learnt this in my report on Aging Well in Our Changing World, there's also some internalized ageism that sits there for many older people. If I can give a practical example of what I'm talking about. Older people are, just like at any other time in life, passionate about their independence and their ability to have autonomy, agency, and decision-making control. And unfortunately, a lot of people perceive that reaching out for help and support brings with it a stigma that of itself is a barrier. And a really good practical example that I often hear from older people and talk about is, say, a walker frame. Now, you'll often find an older person will wait 2 or 3 or 4 years between the time that they've got that emerging need of mobility support and the time they actually act on it. And I think dealing with mental health issues can have exactly the same challenge and the same pathway, where the big issue is the older person has aligned in their own thinking, if I seek support, therefore I'm losing my independence, I'm losing my autonomy, my decision-making control, then there's a stigma that they feel is associated with that. And the language I think that we've now got around that, which is a really good lens, is referring to that as internalized ageism. People are unnecessarily seeing a barrier. And so instead of seeing those devices and aids as positive, then they'll see them as negative. Another practical example, Jim, when I was doing my earlier report, I had a number of older people that would share with me they were experiencing hearing loss. And what a number of them were doing was actually withdrawing from participation in groups rather than coming to terms with the cosmetic wearing a hearing aid, because they felt that was somehow putting a sign on themselves, the same as a walker frame. So I think there's an open conversation that we need to have with some older people. Not everybody's in this box, but it's very common to find that the big barrier is this sort of internalized ageism stigma that people feel, that seeking support of itself is not allowing them to have independence. And I also heard it across cultures, and I heard it in different language. I heard it very common from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander older people. I heard it from diverse communities. So people talk about it in different ways, but I think that's sitting there as a real barrier for some older people.
I have to say I identify with that completely myself as someone who wears hearing aids, but I have absolutely no embarrassment about it. And yet I have a very, very close friend who really, she covers her ears, and she doesn't want anybody to know that she's got hearing aids, and she sees it as a real embarrassment, so that's almost a self-stigmatizing in itself, isn't it? When someone does that, they're denying an essential need in a sense, and that's preventing her, of course, from getting out and making those essential social contacts that we've been talking about as being also important.
Totally agree, Jimmy. Look, it's a significant issue when people then go the next step and they'll say to me, and I'm in a very privileged position, and I know that, over a cup of coffee or at a group, people will share often, very generously with me. But when people, and I know they say to me, and I no longer go to the group that I used to love going to, then that's a significant issue, isn't it? So that's my fear, is that sitting beneath, we've got now that layer that already existed before COVID, and now we've got dealing with COVID on the top of that, and the fear that people have about their own safety.
Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to refer to...
Go ahead.
I wanted to refer to the data that Sunil showed us, which showed a pent-up demand within aged care facilities, mainly residents 80 plus, for mental health services, which, even though I was shocked by it, it's a good sign. People want to talk. People want counselling. And I think that demand will be there, Jared, amongst more and more older people, recognising how important it is that they stay mentally well and seek support. I think the issue is one of meeting the demand, and Sunil referred to that. The resources aren't yet there to meet that demand. I wouldn't mind hearing a bit more on what he might think about how that demand can best be met beyond students. Is it financial resourcing at a federal level?
Yeah,
I think one of the
real
positive... Sorry, Sunil.
Yeah.
I think that's a
question.
question.
I'm happy to comment on that,
isn't it?
Yeah. We've spent a lot of time talking about the barriers and thinking about how do we overcome barriers. You might be surprised to know that up until the 15th of December last year, aged care residents did not have access to Medicare subsidized psychological treatments. They were the only segment of the Australian population that we felt were discriminated against. And I think the assumption there is that if you live in a nursing home, all of your needs are going to be provided for. Your physical needs, instrumental needs, your diet needs, and of course your mental health needs. And we found that just wasn't happening. In fact, we did a survey a few years ago, and across Australia, less than 1% of aged care facilities actually employed their own mental health counsellors. And they were relying on outpatient referrals. And yet, when we went to the community, we found that there were very, very few counsellors and psychologists and social workers who were even trained to provide psychological services to the population. So on the one hand, we've heard about the stigma. On the other hand, there were financial barriers, and there still are, towards getting proper help. And the third barrier is that we just lack the competency within the workforce currently. Of the 39 universities in Australia, less than a handful actually provide dedicated geropsychology training to emerging professionals. We need to do more so that when all of us are living in nursing homes, there will be a workforce for us that are trained and able to provide meaningful counseling. The final thing I'll say about counseling is that when we approach older people living in care and we say, we're here to provide you with counseling, they say, go away. When we say, we'd love to hear more about your situation and your experiences, is it okay if we have a chat? They say, of course, I'd love to. And I think that it has to do with the approach that mental health practitioners take, because there is still a great deal of stigma out there, not just with older people, but also with younger people, about seeing a mental health professional. Because they equate mental health problems with vulnerability and weakness. But if we can learn better ways of having these open conversations, as Gerard says, that destigmatizes counseling and support, I think we'd get further ahead.
But it is interesting that, as you say, social workers, psychologists don't generally train to aid and assist the elderly. Why is there this reticence to address their psychological needs when we see that there's a huge increase in number of people studying psychology, for example, and entering the caring professions? What's going on? What's different? Why don't we have people that are addressing the needs of the elderly, Professor?
It's been an accident that has been allowed to continue for decades. Perhaps it refers to an ageism that's kind of rife within our society, that if you're older, you are not someone who's going to benefit from talk therapy. In fact, we've seen this in surveys where if you go along to a GP and you say you're not feeling too well, you're more likely to go away with medication than a referral to talk therapy. And maybe it all goes down to Freud, that said that when you're older, you're not going to benefit from psychotherapy. I don't know, but it's an accident that's been allowed to continue. And it's an accident that has no simple solutions, because if there are very few clinical supervisors and clinical trainers out there, there are going to be very few students who are going to benefit, if you like, from a different way of thinking about older adults. I think that the more we have these kinds of conversations, and the more we're able to say to the next generation of workers, look, older people are very, very keen for psychological services and counseling, but it's the way in which you approach them that makes the difference. I think we're going to start to see a different kind of conversation develop, other than older people can't benefit from psychotherapy.
And there's definitely, I mean, we're used to terms of ageism and racism and sexism, but ageism is one of those isms that's very important too. I mean, we have expressions like, they've lost their marbles, that elderly people are past it, language that perpetuates the notion that old is in some way bad, that older people perhaps, and I certainly experience this a lot, that as an older or senior Australian, you don't understand the current issues like climate change, or in fact that you may be individually responsible for some of the social and economic problems that currently exist. There's almost a sense of blame that I think I detect towards some older Australians, that I detect on social media like Facebook and Instagram, etc. I'm trying to think of some of the nasty expressions that are sometimes used with older people. I'm just wondering how we can possibly raise the level of awareness that ageism is an ism, just like sexism or racism is an ism.
I think if I could start on that, I think there's some really good progress we're starting to make out of New South Wales, and nationally there's now a whole collective around called Every Age Counts, Jim, where it's being named as a key issue. And just an example, it really struck me recently because one of the things that they have is a charter where people can make a declaration. And so if any of our viewers today haven't done that, I'd really encourage them to have a look at the Every Age Counts campaign and make the declaration and sign up to it. But I noticed one of our former prime ministers was presenting an alternate view on China. And instead of that issue of playing the ball, not the man, when they attacked him, the attack was by one of the commentators, an old fossil.
Yes.
So the language was used to really demean his point rather than dealing with the issue of substance.
Yes.
So
Yes.
with language, the other thing, I just to pick up what Sonal was saying, I'm more upbeat now than I ever have been about what's going to happen in the next 4 to 5 years for us around the mental health here in Victoria. And I know we've got people joining us from all around, but I think the seminal piece of work by our own Royal Commission, which really hasn't got, say, as much focus as the aged care one, it is going to reshape and restructure the delivery. I know when I had a chance to contribute to the Royal Commission, I was really pleased that some of the key messages I'd heard from older people were picked up. Things like renaming the system for, that we're now calling it the adult and older adult system. Just sort of being more inclusive in the language. That one of the specific recommendations is exploring alternatives like social prescribing. How do we connect people with the groups and the services? So I think we're just at the beginning of a really significant period of reform that is going to start to reshape mental health services for older people, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep. I'm sorry, was someone else going to make a comment there? No, I missed that.
I guess just one quick comment around mental health is that when it comes to multiculturalism and mental health, there's also not necessarily a proper translation or understanding around mental health, which can lead to a stigma and a reticence to access mental health services. For example, in some languages, there is no word for mental health well-being. The word for mental health is literally being crazy, or so there's a real strong sense of that comes through just purely in the language itself, which then can lead to that hesitation in accessing services.
I just want to go back to something that's quite obvious, and that's to do with the technology that's rapidly invading all our lives. And I can't help but muse about my poor old departed father, who was born in 1907. He used to catch a train from Mackinnon Station to Moorabbin Station to pay his rates in cash at the then Moorabbin Town Hall, because he didn't trust posting a cheque. Check was, of course, a newfangled thing, and he for most of his life dealt with cash. So while many seniors are quite comfortable with the internet and computer technology, and that's been mentioned, and certainly that is acknowledged, the new IT has come quite late in the lives of many, and many do struggle with the fact that so many government services, utilities, private businesses, use the internet as their main and sometimes only point of contact. We only have to look at the current technology people have to master with QR codes and proving vaccination status currently. I know a lot of seniors are having difficulty with this. How stressful do you think this is for seniors, and how much consideration do you think governments have given to the sort of stress that does cause a lot of seniors that I see?
I was stressed helping my parents out, setting it up.
You were stressed helping
I was
your
stressed
parents.
anyway, hold the phone up. Okay.
Yeah, it's the most significant issue, Jim. It's interesting. When I talk with older people, I sort of put it in from their perspective. I think there's 3 really significant groups, and often when we have a conversation like this, it's just useful to segment a little bit. One of the biggest bits of anger I get from older people is the 92-year-old who says, "Why do you assume I can't use technology?" And so that people don't want to be, and they'll often say, "I don't want to be defined by my age." So don't assume that because I'm older, I can't do it. And I gave that earlier example of people in their 80s from diverse communities that were so proud of themselves that they're able to master Zoom. So I think that's one really important thing, which leads me to the second group, that there's a lot of older people with the right support that can learn a lot more. But it tends to be a different type of training. And a shout out to neighbourhood houses and local councils, the people Chris was referring to before, positive ageing, University of the Third Age, men's sheds. So many of those groups are starting to invest in upskilling their own members. And that's fantastic. But the third group are the ones that I think you're referring to, Jim, which is it's not a small group. The people for whom cost or training or hardware, whatever, is always going to be a bridge too far. And so how do we have a system that still delivers people and a face or a telephone and someone that'll actually answer the telephone?
Yes.
So I totally agree. And I think that's a big group of people. It's not a small group of people who we need to always think about what's the alternate pathway for them.
Yes, well, having recently dealt with Telstra, where everything is automated and you never get to talk to anybody, I find that one of the most stressful experiences I have to put up with on a semi-regular kind of basis. So, yeah, absolutely. Look, I want to go on to a slightly different tack, and that is to do with older people and financial security and secure housing and accommodation, all being very important to ageing well. Unfortunately, recently there's been many reports of older Australians, especially women that have missed out on superannuation, etc., forced to live out of the back of their car or accept accommodation that's clearly substandard and therefore mentally distressing. Difficult question, impossible question, but what can we do about this? I mean, senior card discounts, Mikey, government concessions, etc. The fear that one day pensions may be less accessible to a greater proportion of as the population ages. Do any of you have any general thoughts as to how we might address the financial welfare of seniors, which is clearly connected to mental welfare, and that specific group of people that are in desperate accommodation requirement?
Chris, you're on mute there.
I'm sorry, am I on mute?
No, I'm not, I was.
Chris.
So, Jim, the simple solution is social housing. And I think all major organisations and all levels of government need to be aware that this has been achieved in the past. It was achieved in Melbourne in the 50s and 60s with a massive spend and build. That housing is the most critical factor to people's mental well-being, whether it's housing in their own independent units or whether it's housing in good aged care or good retirement village. Social housing is the answer. And that's not me as a radical speaking. I think anybody from most spectrum would understand that housing is the critical factor. So the provision of social housing, which is achievable, Jim.
Yes.
If I could add to that, picking up what Chris is saying, we're making some, again, it's a Victorian example, but we're making some good steps forward. It's not going to be the total, end by any means, but there are a significant number of people through COVID that were living rough that have now got more permanent housing. So, there's no doubt that, that's part of it that's occurred. We've got the Victorian government's Big Build initiative to, expand the social housing that Chris is talking about, but it's still going to leave us with a gap. There's no doubt about that. And I think the gap is most obvious for the people that just miss out. For all those services, there's an eligibility test. Always the group that I've found over my years in public policy, the group that is most at disadvantage are the people that are just outside. And it often is the group you've just named as the, one of the emerging groups, women over 55. How do we get access to sufficiently cheap rental? And just to give a practical demonstration, Jim, of just how important this issue is, in the survey that I mentioned, so we had a survey of nearly 5,000 older people themselves, and I asked them to rate a whole series of criteria that we gathered from an international assessment, and they rated on a scale of not important through to extremely important. The highest rating was housing. 97% said housing is extremely important. So, in terms of ageing well, I wouldn't have predicted that. I would have thought a whole lot of other things got to number one, but that was the clear number one.
The most practical factor, the most practical necessity, if you like, a roof over your head.
Jim, the Retirement Living Council across Australia, so that's the peak body representing retirement living operators across the country, has actually been doing some work around this also. So as Jared mentioned, it's a complex issue, but actually a policy paper is just being finalised as we speak that refers to this kind of missing middle, those women over 55 who have a certain level of financial wherewithal, but so they don't qualify for a lot of the rental assistance and other mechanisms that are available, but equally they're not in a position that they can enter secure housing long term. And looking at how different models like retirement living or land lease might be able to play a part in that also. So to the very point that the security of accommodation is incredibly important to somebody's mental and physical well-being, and how different housing models might be able to play a larger role in that. But importantly, how to connect that ecosystem. So for those women over 55 who do find themselves in those challenges, there aren't necessarily a lot of social supports available. And just how might you start to connect some of the dots in that ecosystem so that they can explore different options around accommodation. So I think a number of strategies need to be deployed around that.
Are there any other comments on that particular issue? No? All right. Well, look, I want to go on to another issue because we're rapidly running out of time. We only have five more minutes. And I wondered about throwing this question in, but personally, I find this such a fascinating question that I had to do it. So be prepared, and I hope you'll bear with me. We had a very interesting forum during National Mental Health Month on religion and mental health. Now, in the 1988 film Cocktail, I presume maybe one of you might have seen it. I haven't seen it, I have to say, but I know the quote. Tom Cruise, as Brian Flanagan says, ultimately everything ends badly. Otherwise it wouldn't end. In other words, all life ends ultimately, and we have to accept that ultimate existential reality. And that question about life for seniors, which we can't ignore, and as highly intelligent experts on ageing, I'm interested to know your views on maintaining mental health in view of our impending mortality and the loss of friends and loved ones as we age. I mean, how do we get around this reality that life is going to end? Things are going to change. People we love, we're going to lose. Friends that we've grown up with and we depend on are going to pass away, etc. And I'm very happy if you simply wish to pass on that question, because I understand it's a very personal and difficult question, and not necessarily within your particular areas of expertise. But I'm just interested from a personal perspective, how you feel.
So, Jim, if it's true, as the data says, that people get happier as they get older, one of the reasons behind that happiness, I think, is people's acceptance and understanding and awareness that life begins and life ends. And there's a certain happiness factor. If you're feeling mentally well, there's a certain happiness factor in that you actually understand the journey of life. That's my contribution. The
journey of life, yeah. But that only seems to apply to a certain group, Chris, doesn't it? I mean, we're talking about our post-65 retirees.
No, not necessarily. If overall people get happier as they get older, that's a sign that they're, and you can't ignore the fact that you're moving towards the end of your life. Then to me, that's a fact that many people, if not the majority, come to terms with it. I'd be interested to hear what others say.
Yeah, no, sure. Yep.
I'd like to make a couple of comments there.
Please.
We've found in our dealings with older people living in care that they have a great yearning to reminisce and to make sense of their lives. And I think spirituality is a core component for many people about that. But the trouble is there are very few people you can tell your story to, because telling a story requires an audience. And I think we see a lot of people trying to get their autobiography out, their life story out. But it's very, very tricky. But very simple questions can often unearth what's on their minds, such as, where did you grow up? What's the story of your name? What was your family like? How are things different now compared to how they were in the past? And sometimes it's through the telling of stories that the person begins to understand what their life has been about and who they are. Something that Erik Erikson calls ego integrity, as an antidote to bitterness and despair and regret. And the interesting thing that we've discovered is that even though life has been full of challenges, when someone is able to connect the dots and understand how they got to where they are, they feel a sense of control, a narrative ownership about their lives, and this idea that even though their life has been difficult, it's been unique. And as you know, in our society, we really prize the unique over the mass-produced, right? That one-off guitar is so much more valuable than the mass-produced stuff. And so we found that through allowing people to tell their story, whether it includes an element of spirituality, religion, hardship, triumph, they emerge from that kind of experience with this idea that their life has been worth living. What a pity that we don't have more opportunities like that as we grow older. So I guess that's another call to action, to provide opportunity after opportunity for people to tell their life story.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked that question. In view of that answer, I'm so glad I asked that question. Thank you so much for that. I would like to really bottle that and keep it. Yeah. Do we have any other comments on that? I think that idea, that personal notion of being able to tell your tale, tell your story, and that affirmation and the respect that it generates if you're able to tell your story. I think that's really something. That's really something.
For me, Jim, there's another side that people shared with me in that first attribute, which I didn't talk about today, called positive attitude. One of the ingredients, I think, for the best outcome is what we carry in our hearts and how we view the world. And I know for me, I mean, moving towards my mid-60s, but one of my own commitments I've made to myself, remember that show, Grumpy Old Men? I have a theory and I'm not a geneticist, but I think that there's this sort of grumpy gene that around about 65 turns itself on. So I sort of made this commitment, I'm going to turn it off. But I can remember, just on an individual level, I think it ties very much to that positive attitude. And I think so many people use different words, but they're really tuned into it. And it's about the attitude that we take to, we're going to continue to grow and evolve as we get older. We're not just sort of going to, hide under the bushel somewhere. And for me, it was really crystallized a couple of years ago. I was having a cup of coffee at the Victoria Market and I was just reflecting. I was thinking about it. And, sometimes there's this happenstance in life. And I looked around and there was a person wearing a T-shirt and the slogan on the back was "Never Stop Exploring." And I thought, yeah, I'm going to own that. That's exactly what I've been thinking. How do you get older and still keep that spirit of innovation? So
Yes.
It was interesting. Older people could really name that, use very different words, but they named exactly what you're talking about.
I think, Tim, if I can add to that, I mean, it is
Please.
fundamentally about that view that you started with in terms of life in your years. And, it comes back to a lot of those sort of ages, views, etc. But, this time of life should be no less meaningful or positive for people than any other part of their life. And certainly, it's up to all of us to check ourselves when we have a view that somehow that sense of decline or God's waiting room or I'm just sort of parked here to die. Fundamentally, people still want to have meaning and purpose and something to look forward to in every day. And I think, as John said, that sense of continuing to grow or to learn, to be relevant and have purpose in your life, because whether you're 16, 60 or 90, you want to have some reason to get out of bed each day. And that's a pretty fundamental human need. And so I think it's how we continue to create those opportunities that are relevant for each person, meaningful in their life, and give them that sense of why they want to get out of bed each day.
Judy, I can see you're just bursting to make a comment, so please.
I'm nodding furiously because I'm just agreeing with what everyone's saying. I do.
Wonderful comments, and I'm so grateful to all of you for your wonderful discussion and Sometimes I've been a bit halting, I think, in trying to formulate my questions before such eminent people. But it's been an absolute privilege and pleasure to host this panel. You've all been brilliant, and I'm really thrilled. So I'd like to pass back now to our beloved chairperson, Vasan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you very much for all panelists for the insightful panel discussion. And we learned a lot out of this panel discussion, and especially will assist me to, as I mentioned earlier, to establish my own community's first ever ethno-specific Indian aged care in Victoria. Thank you. Now I would like you to view with me a short address from Mr. Bruce Wong, CEO of Food Solutions. Bruce Wong is the Managing Director of Food Solutions Group Australia and America. His latest community endeavor is the Mental Health Foundation Australia's Meals to the Community COVID-19 project. Launched in August 2020, he is one of the key founders of the project. Through his financial contribution of a new refrigerated food delivery truck, Mental Health Foundation Australia is able to roll out these weekly cooked meals for distribution to needy communities in partnership with Department of Health and Human Services, the Salvation Army of Victoria. Bruce continues to fund Mental Health Foundation's Meals Project with regular weekly donation of cooking items and other essentials. To date, MHFA has delivered over 95,000 prepared meal boxes to the communities and individuals in need during COVID-19. Please join me in viewing Mr. Bruce Wong's address.
Mental Health Foundation Australia is an organisation committed to improving the mental well-being of all Australians. Food Solutions' vision and value are very aligned with Mental Health Foundation Australia, and we have been supporting this charitable organisation for over 2 years now through various programs. We have been very involved in the meal delivery initiative organised by the foundation, which was a huge success last year and has continued this year with over 85,000 meals delivered so far. Food Solution is honoured to be involved in the National Mental Health Month Awareness campaign run by the foundation, which brings the Australian community together to raise awareness, stem the stigma, and initiate conversation about better mental health and importance of mental well-being, which is required now more than ever. And one thing we can thank the pandemic for is bringing mental health to the forefront, creating the opportunity for more open discussion to be had, furthering the breaking down of stigma and the opportunity to really look at what is required in the mental health space. Another thing we can thank the pandemic for is platforms like Zoom, which help bring us all together in such a wonderful way. This year, the foundation is launching for the first time the Mental Health Appeal on the 10th of October to raise funds to develop a program to educate the community in a hope to prevent youth suicide. I commend the important work Mental Health Foundation Australia is doing in the Australian community, especially within the multicultural cohort. My best wishes and appreciation to Vasan and Jim for providing excellent leadership and direction to this organization. Food Solution will continue to be involved with the Mental Health Foundation Australia and its initiative in improving the mental health of all Australians. I encourage you all to interact with more events during National Mental Health Month, which you can find out more about their website. www.nhfa.org.au. And thank you and enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce Wong, on your support this year. Before I hand over and invite Jim back to deliver a word of thanks, I sincerely thank our staff who is responsible in delivering today's event. Akshay, Nitya, Aneka, and Felicity, thank you so much for your ongoing support and helping the foundation to grow to the next level. Hand over back to you, Jim.
Oh, well, thank you, Vasan. I really have a great honour. Look, first of all, I'd like to congratulate and thank Jared for the wonderful work that he does as Commissioner for Senior Australians. And that document, that seminal document that we've referred to so much, Aging Well in a Changing World, has been so central to my understanding of many of the issues. And I think it's such an important document that we now have in public to be able to refer to. Thank you so much, Jared, for all the work that you do. Dr. Judy Tang, a wonderful presentation. I particularly like you dispelling the myths regarding dementia and so forth, that we're not all headed down that track. There is an end eventually, but it need not necessarily be, as is inevitable in everything, an end, but it need not be an end in dementia, etc. Beverly Smith from Australian Unity, to hear of the 14 standalone facilities and your advancements in smaller households, constant staff, dedicated rostering models, etc. Your advances there is very, very heartening. Obviously, there are huge challenges that we've addressed, but Australian Unity is certainly doing its bit to address those issues, and we've been very grateful for your presentation today, which has been so illuminating. And I might just say that as a nearly 50-year client of Australian Unity, I'm very glad to hear of the developments for older Australians, because one day, perhaps in the not too distant future, I will be one of your clients in one of those facilities. Professor Sunil Bar, fascinating information, alerting us to some of the problems, but also the potential solutions for our aged care focus. Excellent. I particularly like that your response to that existential question of aging and how we can develop an appreciation of ourselves as all being unique and of being unique individuals and having a value as a result of that, and a hope that that value will sustain us as we get older. Chris Reedy, what can I say about you? You've been just such a wonderful support over the years to the Mental Health Foundation, and your excellent directorship of Senior Mental Health Month has been an inspiration to us all. You've always been enormously kind to the Mental Health Foundation, and I thank you so much for your contributions in every regard, and even to the extent that you're happy to take a forum while sitting in your car. That shows real dedication as far as I'm concerned. Just on another note, this forum has been the penultimate event for the National Mental Health Month 2021. Tomorrow we will have our final event dealing with the need for integrated mental health hubs. And I look forward to that. I think it's also appropriate at this time to congratulate our chairperson, Vasan Srinivasan, and the staff of the Mental Health Foundation, as Vasan has already done, but I would also wish to do, for the exceptional planning and effort involved that's allowed us to run over 60 remarkable events in all states of Australia during October. A special thanks, however, to you, our audience, and my sincere wish that this event has been a benefit to our understanding of the wants and needs of senior Australians' mental health. Thank you all for participating and being a part of an invaluable day. And now back to our chairperson, Vasan.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you everyone for joining us. And we have one more day to go tomorrow when we will start working with you from 1st of November for the next year programs. Thank you.